Hello, my name is Barbara Dow, and I am presenting an online presentation of an adult learning theory called social cognitive learning theory. This theory was proposed by Albert Bandura. Before I get into the lesson, I would like to give you some background information. As part of a major assessment for this education course, I had to present to a face-to-face audience. The face-to-face audience met in the library at the school where I am the librarian. Um, there were 5 audience members, and I also had a video recorder. This person was responsible for recording the lesson. He was also one of the audience members, so I guess we could say I had 6 audience members. The lesson lasted about 45 to 50 minutes. It consisted of a PowerPoint presentation, a handout, and a survey. Um, in analyzing the audience, I could say that they were energetic, they were excited and eager to learn, and it was a good lesson. I fed off of their energy. They seemed pleased at my presentation, and everything went really well. I felt comfortable because, teaching is what I do, and speaking in front of a live audience who can give you immediate feedback feels a lot more comfortable than teaching online you know, looking at yourself through a webcam and then speaking. It feels more like a television commercial than it does, teaching. But in this, digital age that we're living in, uh, this type of learning is becoming more and more commonplace. And so learning this new technology is something that's necessary. And so here's my presentation. Uh, Albert Bandura's social cognitive learning theory. As I was teaching my face-to-face audience, the first thing I did was I took a quick pre-assessment. This pre-assessment consisted of 3 questions, and the questions were designed to get my students to open up, to feel comfortable speaking out in front of other class members, and also the questions had uh, a hint of Bandura's social cognitive theory uh, implied in them. In other words, they all dealt with observational learning. The first question asks if your child saw you smoking cigarettes or constantly lounging on the sofa, how likely are they to portray the same acts? Number 2, when you reward a student for a job well done or for good behavior, what is your motivation? And 3, how are TV commercials successful in getting consumers to buy products? So you can see all 3 of those questions have underlying uh, social cognitive assumptions. Um, The session's objectives were first to make connections between behaviorist, social cognitive, and cognitive learning theories, to examine the relationship between one's social environment and human behavior through role playing, and to define social cognitive learning theory. Those were the 3 session objectives, and those were the questions that were asked on the handout that I presented to my audience. Um, to segue into the lesson, after I've gone over, we discussed the pre-assessment questions, and then we went over the session objectives. Then I would ask the class, what is social learning? Is anyone familiar with that concept of social learning? Well, if I got a correct response, then we would go from there and we would talk about it. And if no one responded, then I would go ahead and tell my students that um, social cognitive learning is simply observational learning. In other words, someone modeling a behavior, and then students choosing to imitate that behavior, or adults choosing to imitate that behavior. It's simply observational learning. And we'll get more into uh, the different principles of social learning later. First, let's look at Albert Bandura's background. Who is Albert Bandura? Well, he was born in Canada in 1925, He earned his PhD in psychology in 1949. He began teaching at Stanford University in 1953. Right now, he is currently teaching at Stanford University, and he is known as the oldest living psychologist. And it's kind of remarkable as to how Bandura, chose his profession. It's said that as a student at Stanford University, he hadn't quite picked a major yet, and so he was in the library browsing. He saw an open book and he began to read the book, and he became so fascinated by the contents of the book that he decided that he wanted to major in psychology because the book was a psychology book. And so from that encounter with the book, the psychology book, we now have the social cognitive learning theory. Like in any theory, most theories are based on someone else's previous assumptions. So we have to look at how Bandura came up with his idea of how adults learn. The first person that we'll look at is Jean Piaget. Piaget created a theory called cognitive development theory. He believed that children construct their understanding of the world through their active involvement and interaction. Piaget studied his own children. He also studied the friends, the neighborhood friends of his children, to focus on not only what children knew, but how they knew it. He described children's understanding as their schemas and how they use assimilation and accommodation to learn. And so Piaget, the French psychiatrist, created a process of learning called cognitive learning, and it has more to do with the stage developmental areas of children and not adults. He was more interested in how children learn, and he also compared the learning of children and adults as being the same, that they learn pretty much the same way. Piaget was the first psychologist to make a systematic study of cognitive development. He was the first. Before his work, the common assumption in psychology was that children are merely less competent thinkers than adults. And so he put that hypothesis to rest with his stage developmental or cognitive learning theory. Another theorist that we need to look at and compare to Piaget and looking at Bandura's theory is B.F. Skinner's behaviorist theory. B.F. Skinner, a psychologist as well, proposed that children operate on their environment. He called it operational conditioning. He believed that learning could be broken down into smaller tasks and that offering immediate rewards for accomplishments would stimulate further learning. And so we can see how Bandura's cognitive learning theory, Piaget's cognitive development theory, and Skinner's behaviorist theory all deal with environmental factors. We also can assume that since Bandura's theory has this societal context assumption that he is a behaviorist, and his approach, I would agree, has a lot of behavioral tendencies. Behaviorism is primarily concerned with observational behavior, but it doesn't deal with events like thinking, like Bandura's theory. The cognitive part, the thinking part, is what sets it apart from strictly being a behaviorist approach. The behaviorist approach sees says that psychology should be seen as a science, and Bandura believes the same thing, that psychology should be seen as a science. Uh, Behaviorism believes that uh, all behavior is learned from the environment. It's a learned behavior, and the environment has a part to play in that. It's concerned with a behavior that can be observed, uh, and so from those approaches, you can see how easily Bandura's theory can be labeled as a behaviorist approach. Another thing that's sort of misleading and would lead one to believe that Bandura's theory is based on a behavioral approach is that he published a book called The Social Learning Theory in 1963, and this book combined both cognitive and behavioral frameworks. Um, Social learning theories say that because people can learn through observation alone, their learning may not necessarily be shown in their performance. So you can learn something without performing it. You can observe something and you can learn from it. Learning may be the result in behavior change. The learning can be cognitive. You learned it in your head. You didn't have to act it out. You didn't have to repeat it. You didn't have to tell anyone. It was just absorbed through thinking and then knowing. And that's what Bandura's theory is all about. So is Bandura a behaviorist or a cognitive psychologist? Well, one would tend to believe that he is a little bit of both. Um, a cognitive form of learning that is based on societal context. It hypothesizes that people learn through observing the behaviors of others. I believe that's Albert Bandura's personality theory. Social cognitive theory believes that individuals are products of their own environment and social system. It's centered on the idea that we are agents and we have control of our behavior. So you can choose to learn something or not. But we learn best this way, through observing, according to Albert Bandura. Let's look at the principles of social learning theory. Bandura constructed a diagram, a triangular shaped diagram, that says that the world and a person's behavior cause each other. One is the modeled behavior, and then you have the person, or what's inside of them, the innate person, and then at the bottom you have the learning environment. And one causes the other to happen. It has that like cycle effect. And that's what social learning is. It's also called a triadic responsibility model or causation model. The world and a person's behavior cause each other. There are also other factors in the social cognitive principles. Another factor is self-regulation. Self-regulation is when the individual has his own idea about what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior and chooses actions accordingly. A lot of Bandura's ideas have had and still do have heavy implications on our educational system. Um, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Let's look at let's look a little bit more at self-regulation. Self-regulation techniques provide an effective method for improving student behavior. Students need to know what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And how will they know this? Well, they observe what is appropriate by a model. And that model could be the parent or the teacher. And then they can choose to imitate that behavior. That's what self-regulation is. We learn by example. Self-efficacy is another principle in Bandura's social cognitive theory. Self-efficacy is the belief in one's capabilities to organize and execute the sources of action required to manage prospective situations. How can teachers teach self-efficacy? By teaching students that they are competent and that they have